What is going on YouTube? Gamus here and welcome to episode 36 of the Tech Pills live stream. So let's jump right to the first news of today. GIMP 3 is getting closer. So about a week ago, a new snapshot of the famous GNU image manipulation program, also known as the GIMP, has been released. Version 2.99.2 is the latest snapshot for one of the last big Linux apps that's still stuck in GTK 2. This development release serves as, of course, a preview to showcase and test out the huge amount of changes that are leading to GIMP 3.0. And of course, the biggest upgrade in this new version is the upgrade to the GTK3 toolkit. This will bring native high DPI support and Wayland support, as well as the possibility to theme GIMP by just using CSS, as with any other GTK3 app, which is just great, considering that GTK themes for GIMP are quite a popular thing. And besides having different, shades of dark for your image editor, kind of makes sense if you think about it. It's just something that people are used to, and I know personally that if you're used to a certain shade of dark for your application, any other one doesn't really work. It's a weird thing, but this is very interesting, at least for me. Being able to just use CSS to theme GIMP is a very welcome feature. Some new things include a new plugin API that has been released, giving developers the ability to write new plugins in either Python 3, JavaScript, Lua, or Vala. All of these are very popular languages, and in particular for Python 3 and JavaScript, this could bring some very nice new plugins to the platform, considering how popular both languages are, and in particular for Python 3. There are lots and lots of image processing and neural network libraries for Python 3, so I suppose we could see some of that coming to GIMP in the form of new plugins, so this is kind of exciting. I know that GIMP already supports Python plugins, but I'm pretty sure the support is kind of limited, and possibly limited to Python 2, considering that it's probably still using the old GTK2 bindings for Python, and I don't think those are supported in Python 3. Anyway, other noteworthy features and improvements include a big refactoring and code cleanup, of course, as well as better multi-layer management, render caching to improve performance, and better support for digital pens and drawing tablets. And if you know about drawing tablets in particular on GIMP, they were always kind of finicky, and you had to plug them in before actually starting the program, and it was, I don't want to say necessarily a mess, but it was definitely something annoying. So seeing that they're doing work towards improving support for these specialized drawing tools hardware is pretty good. It's actually great. Of course, it's still not perfect, and there are still a number of bugs and compatibility issues that need to be worked out before the fatidic 3.0 release. Despite the move to GTK3, Wayland compatibility is not 100% there yet, as there are still some blocking bugs left to fix. A number of memory leaks has also been reported and will need addressing before they can call this ready for mass consumption. Anyway, I'm happy to see GIMP moving forward and finally seeing the port to GTK3 closing in, just in time for GTK4. I mean, jokes aside, I don't really care too much at this point if they want to port to GTK4 or not. And besides, the porting effort from 3 to 4 should be a lot easier anyway, so I guess they need time to work things out. And besides, I mean, GTK4 is shaping up to be pretty awesome, but GTK3 is no slouch either, and having GIMP running on GTK3 will mean, well, all of these improvements are things that we've all been waiting for, and in particular high DPI support. We're talking about graphics apps here, so having proper support for high DPI is something that is a must-have for a graphics program. And I've already seen lots of improvements when Inkscape was ported to GTK 3 recently, so I can only expect GIMP 3 to be on the same level of awesomeness as far as improvements to the overall user experience goes. All right, let's move on. Let's move right to the next news of today. Dell is introducing hardware privacy features in their upcoming laptops. Some Linux vendors, like Purism, have been doing this for a while now, and I mean having physical electrical toggles in their devices to turn off hardware like your webcam, microphone, and even Wi-Fi and Bluetooth modules. These are very requested features from the kind of users that Purism targets with their devices, and those particular toggles are there in all their devices, including all of their laptops and the Librem 5 smartphone. That's still, well, it's coming. It's partially here in some shape or form. But anyway, it's one of the distinctive features of the Purism lineup of products. And there are other vendors like Pine64 that I can think of that do implement hardware switches, or mostly hardware switches. Pine64 has this thing where they actually toggle the power to some particular components in your system. In the Pinebook Pro, if I remember correctly, by using the embedded firmware inside the keyboard. So it's not controlled; it's still software, but it's not controlled by the operating system. Instead, it's controlled directly by the keyboard firmware, so that it's a lot more secure and should not be able to be bypassed by any malware that you can get on your device. And there have been various implementations of this idea. So these two that I've just talked about are some variations of it. And Dell seems to be interested in introducing similar features as well. They recently contributed some new drivers to the Linux kernel, enabling users to turn off their microphone and webcam with a simple key combination. This new feature is, of course, controlled by software, so it needs a driver, so we can only speculate that it needs actual software to work. And so it's controlled by the operating system, it's controlled by the kernel in particular, and it does make sense. It's not a hardware kill switch per se, but it's still controlled by a part of the operating system that should be pretty safe from tampering. I'm talking about the kernel. So you press your key combination on your keyboard, and then the kernel instructs the hardware to turn off certain devices. It's still less secure compared to the other implementations I just told you about, but still better than not having this kind of control at all, or having some kind of user space control that doesn't make any sense, of course, because any application in user space could manipulate these kill switches, so it wouldn't really make sense. So having this in the kernel, again, not the best compared to other solutions, but definitely the least invasive in terms of having to do actual modifications to their existing hardware to implement these features, and it's still pretty secure. Another interesting new addition is something called privacy screen, and this could possibly be a way to control a specialized kind of laptop screen to reduce viewing angles for better privacy when you're out and about with your laptop and you don't want other people to just know what you're doing on your laptop. As of right now, there are not any devices compatible with these new drivers, but they should be coming next year. So if you're interested in this kind of thing and you like to have your hardware produced by a mainstream manufacturer, be on the lookout for these new laptops that will ship again, probably will be released probably next year by Dell. And I think this is a pretty good indication of what consumers are starting to require on their devices. more control, better privacy, and frankly, I think it's a great thing to see mainstream manufacturers like Dell starting to answer to these requests. It's not really something that you can take for granted. I mean, these are the same manufacturers that struggle to support Linux, and they're now actually listening to what at least part of the user base wants. So we've seen lots of manufacturers taking interest in Linux, in shipping Linux products. And of course, Dell, with their Sputnik project, has long shipped Linux laptops. Now it's been probably one of the first mainstream OEMs to ship Linux on their laptops. And seeing this kind of care and this kind of attention to these particular privacy features is another indication that the company is in a good direction, at least for us Linux and privacy nerds. This is something that at least we mostly care about. So possibly gone are the days of putting tape on top of your webcam if you have a proper hardware or kernel controlled hardware kill switch on your device. Is better than having some some nasty sticker on top of your webcam. At least that's what I think. I never liked that solution personally, so having this kind of feature is something that I'm really happy to see. So let's move on to the next news of today. Pine64 announces their next Pinephone Community Edition, and this time it's going to be KDE. So as far as we know, this shouldn't be anything too exciting. It's probably still, again, as far as we know, the same hardware revision as the Manjaro edition. Of course, if some hardware bugs or hardware problems are found in the current Manjaro edition, they will probably be fixed in the next version. But I don't know. It seems pretty solid to me at this point. Anyway, this new version will ship with KDE Neon, which is fairly interesting. Will still feature two editions, the same as we've always seen since the post-market OS edition. So a 16 gigabytes of storage and 2 gigabytes of RAM model, and the usual convergence pack with 30 gigabytes of storage and 3 gigabytes of RAM, bundled with the convergence dock that we already know about. On another note, Pine64 also announced that their wireless charging back cover should be ready soon and will be available sometime next year. To be honest, I'm really impatient to get my hands on their keyboard back cover. The other thing that I've talked about in a previous episode, that's probably going to be pretty amazing. I mean, this is something that I'm really waiting to see, and I really would love to play around with this thing. Having a physical keyboard again integrated into my phone would be just amazing. And that's about it. A new version of the Pinephone yet again, and this is starting to get less and less interesting, to be honest, which is a good thing. It means that the Pinephone platform is stabilizing in some way, shape, or form. And it means that the product and the hardware are probably at this point as solid as they will get. Anyway, let's move on to the next news of today. The Raspberry Pi 400, a Raspberry Pi 4 inside the keyboard. So you probably heard about this in these past weeks already, because it's been pretty huge news. And all right, let's just talk about this. This is a keyboard. If you're familiar with the Raspberry Pi keyboard, aesthetically, like in the exterior, it's the same. So it's a Raspberry Pi keyboard. It's one of those like keyboards that look like they've been ripped off a laptop, if you know what I mean, like the Apple style keyboards with the chiclet keys. And the real difference here is that the Raspberry Pi 400 is not just a keyboard. It comes with a full Raspberry Pi 4 inside. And it's not your regular Raspberry Pi 4, at least as far as the form factor goes, because they've actually changed the shape of the PCB and adapted it to better fit inside of a keyboard. And all of the ports that on a normal Raspberry Pi are, well, on every angle are now all directed to the back of the keyboard. So that's actually a lot better for usability and for plugging things. And if you want to use the Raspberry Pi as a proper desktop computer, having the ports all one side is actually just better. Anyway, the other differences from a standard Raspberry Pi 4 are that it has a slightly more powerful CPU. To be fair, this is not a different CPU. It's still the same CPU you will find in the Raspberry Pi 4. It's just a different revision of it. And since it now ships with a passive cooler, it's a chunk of, I think, aluminum or steel. I think it's aluminum, basically stuck on top of the CPU. There's more thermal headroom, of course, and so they were able to also increase the clock speed quite significantly. And it also ships with 4 gigabytes of RAM. So it's kind of a shame that they didn't choose to opt for the 8 gigabytes of RAM SKU for this keyboard Raspberry Pi all-in-one thing. But anyway, 4 gigabytes is still enough. What you're gonna do on a Raspberry Pi anyway? And I mean, this is all. That's all of it. And this is all that we have with this product. It's very simple. Still, it's very interesting. If you remember, I don't actually remember. I'm too young to remember any of this, but I know I mean, historically, there have been, like in the 1980s, 1990s, probably more closer to 1980s, those computers that were bundled into keyboards like the Commodore 64 and all the other less popular ones. So this is kind of a throwback to that time. Of course, a Commodore 64 used to be basically as big as a small computer nowadays. Well, as a small tower computer, I guess. It was pretty big for a keyboard. It wasn't a small keyboard, but it was a computer and a keyboard bundle all in one package. So this is probably some kind of throwback to that age, and it's actually pretty fun if you think about it. The Raspberry Pi, it has always had this like retro fashion to it, if you know what I mean. They've been bringing what was good of the technology of old to today's market, which is pretty great in my opinion. And besides, everyone nowadays has a TV with HDMI input or a monitor lying around. So you just take your keyboard, plug it into a TV, and you're good to go. You can use your computer if you don't need a mouse, if you don't need a desktop environment, or if you're akin to using something like i3 or other tiling window managers, you're probably good without a mouse even. So you can just use this thing, plug into a monitor, just typing on the keyboard. I don't know. It's something that it really tickles my curiosity, my interest on how you would use such a computer nowadays. Of course, this is more like kind of a toy or a way for, I don't know, young people to learn about Linux and computers and how they work, more than an actual computer for day-to-day work, unless, of course, your work is very simple and can be handled through a Raspberry Pi. But anyway, just a couple of cons I wanted to talk about this idea. The idea in itself, I mean, it's great. I love it. I love the concept. I love the how they improved on the Raspberry Pi, how they actually went and designed a different PCB for this new edition of the Raspberry Pi instead of just putting a regular Raspberry Pi 4 or even a compute module inside the keyboard and call it a day. They actually put some effort into it. And one other nice thing that I love about this thing is that it still maintains the GPIO pins, and they're, again, on the back of the keyboard, so along with all the other ports. And when I saw that, I immediately imagined like a like modules that you can plug into the GPIO header and have something like, I don't know, a small e-ink screen for your terminal or whatever, or an AMOLED screen, or maybe something like an LED matrix to show some information or some animation or something, or just to play around maybe. And having like these modules just plug on the back of this keyboard, and being able to hot swap them depending on what you need to do. This just sounds like a nice thing. It's one of those cyberpunk things that you see maybe in science fiction, and I don't know, you read about in science fiction books and cyberpunk books or whatever. And having something like this in the real world, it just feels nice. I mean, it's one of those things that I really love to see. Being able to have such a nice package, but for computer, but it's also a hacking device, hacking in the sense, of course, of playing around with technology, and the original meaning of hacking, of course. And it's something that I just love to see. The only thing that I wanted to say about this is that it's not perfect, and even if I was interested, if I needed something like this, if I had a use for it, I wouldn't buy it for one simple reason. I am a mechanical keyboard junkie, and having to use what's basically a laptop keyboard on such a nice device, I think it's kind of detrimental to the whole experience. I know that for most people it's good enough, and it's probably even better than what keyboard they already use on their computer. But still, if they really want to push this to the next level, I think that they should try to sell like possibly a bigger version, but instead of using their chiclet keyboard, using a mechanical keyboard. That would be really interesting. And if they want to step it up even a little bit more, they can probably use the GPIO headers to actually control the keyboard matrix, so you can play around with the actual keyboard and the keyboard firmware, because it's running on your operating system, on the same computer you're using to type things on. That would be kind of more complicated to do, of course, because it wouldn't be just a normal keyboard anymore. It would be wouldn't just be something like a device that you internally plug into an internal USB header. You would have the keyboard actually be controlled by Raspberry Pi. So it is kind of a weird idea, but it would be an interesting way for people to learn more about keyboards and being able to customize the way that their keyboard works. Maybe even like create some custom LED effects with like Python and all the other tools that you have to play around with and program onto the Raspberry Pi. And this isn't something that hasn't been done. I mean, the mechanical keyboard part, not everything else that I've talked about. People have already been putting Raspberry Pis into mechanical keyboards and creating like those kind of, again, pretty sci-fi, cyberpunk cyber decks. That's what they're known. That's what they're called in the community, you know. And having like mechanical keyboards with the Raspberry Pi inside, and possibly like a small screen with a terminal coming out of the keyboard. That's on another level, of course, but that's what I wanted to see here. That's what I would have preferred to see in such a product. Of course, this is mostly a pipe dream, because mechanical keyboards aren't cheap, and they are pretty cheap nowadays. But if you want to do something properly, you have to spend some money on it. And of course, this keyboard, this Raspberry Pi 400 with a computer inside, it costs about 70 euros, something like that. So it's not all that expensive. And of course, if you wanted to make it mechanical, it would have costed probably 200 or something like that euros, because of course it costs more to produce mechanical keyboards than it does chiclet keyboards. And one nice thing that I really want to see as an evolution on this same idea, I don't know if they will do it, but at this point they're on the right path. They could do a full-on laptop. I mean, they already were able to put the Raspberry Pi inside the keyboard. So just attach a screen, or just use a one of those like generic clamshell devices that are empty inside, and you just design a custom Raspberry Pi PCB to go inside the laptop, put a battery in there, and you have a laptop powered by Raspberry Pi. Again, this is something the community has been playing around for some time now, creating like junky Raspberry Pi powered laptops. But of course, creating a full-on proper laptop, it's not an easy task. But if companies like Pine64 are doing it with the Pinebook and the Pinebook Pro, I don't see why the Raspberry Pi Foundation cannot do this as well. Probably they will at some point. I would really love to see a Raspberry Pi laptop. That would be very different from these, and at the same time pretty close to what they're already doing here. All right, and let's move on to the final sneak peek of the day, because this is not really news. This is not really something that I want to talk too much about, but I just recently received my Pinephone, the Manjaro Community Edition. So it's here. I have it. I've been playing around with it these last few days. Couple of things that I want to say. This is a development device, all right? This is not daily driver material yet. And it's not because of the hardware. And that's something that I'm relieved to say. The hardware is actually pretty decent. The software needs some work, including my apps. The apps that I've been developing, they all need work. And some of it has been done, like the smaller things, but there are still some things that need improving. And particularly on the performance side, I came to discover that GTK3, some of it has some pretty serious issues with performance with some widgets. It's not a universal thing. And besides, these are things that will probably get a lot better in GTK4. So this is one of the reasons why I'm excited about GTK4, because it will improve performance in a number of situations with a number of widgets and with a number of already pretty widely used configurations. So when GTK4 is available for Python, which is not currently, there's a merge request open in the PyGobject repository to include support for GTK4. It's still work in progress. Should mostly work. Again, as soon as I know more, you will know. So need some work. The software on the Pinephone needs some work. And I'm one of those people to blame here, at least for the apps that I maintain. So there's that. I have work to do now that I spent my money and bought this device. Still, it's just awesome. I love the idea. I love the implementation. It's just what I imagined. You have Linux on your phone. Your phone is no longer a phone. It's a computer with a small screen and a battery. That's it. That's what it should have been from the very beginning. And I just love what Pine64 has been doing, what Purism has been doing with Librem 5. Of course, this is the same idea, the different implementation, slightly different implementation. And Purism has some different goals in mind, more than just having a Linux phone. They want to have a private phone and a phone that you control 100%. Pine64 doesn't really care too much about all this stuff. Of course, they do care about open source and they do care about putting the user in control, but they're not so picky about proprietary blobs and stuff that they will try, and they are trying to remove from the operating systems that they ship. But it shouldn't be a blocker. It shouldn't be the reason why you choose this or that CPU. It shouldn't be a reason why you cannot do this kind of thing. They put a working device in the hands of developers and they said, do whatever, do your thing and develop this ecosystem. This is something that I just love. I am now part of a new ecosystem, the Linux phone ecosystem, and it's very young. It's been around for like, what, 2-3 years now in a proper manner, and it's already doing great. So really happy to see what's been going on with this little device here, and I cannot wait to see what's more to come. And with that, guys, I think this is gonna wrap it up for today's episode. Thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you like this video, please make sure to press the press the thumbs up button down there, and also remember to subscribe to my channel if you want more of this. Remember to join the TechPills community at techpills.technology/community. You'll find all the links in the description, or you can use one of these nice QR codes over here on my left. And again, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.